Is Canada going to be the USA's 51st state? What if I told you Canada could become the 51st state of the USA? Crazy? Maybe. But history tells a different story. Stay with us till the end. This is a roller coaster of history, politics, and the future. And before we begin, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? Would you be for or against this idea? Believe it or not, the debate about Canada becoming part of the US isn't new. It has deep historical roots and keeps resurfacing, especially when American politics shifts dramatically. This idea dates back to the 1700s, when American revolutionaries tried to bring Canada into their independence movement. But Canada refused. But this doesn't end here. During the Cold War era, some American politicians believed a unified North America would strengthen economic and military power. This debate has reignited when Trump questioned trade agreements, suggesting Canada would be better off as a U.S. state rather than dealing with tariffs. So, where does this idea stand today? Is it just a fantasy, or does history suggest otherwise? For the past few days, we've been hearing rumors that Donald Trump wants Canada to join the United States. But is this the first time such an absurd idea has been suggested? Let's take a step back and dive into history to understand just how long the concept of merging the two nations has been around, and why it hasn't happened yet. The United States and Canada share the longest undefended border in the world, over 8,800 kilometers stretching from the Atlantic to the Pacific. But did you know that, at one point in history, the United States actively tried to take Canada by force? Let's explore some key historical events that shaped this long-standing relationship and the dreams of annexation that have come and gone. For this, let's rewind to 1812, when the U.S., driven by a desire for expansion, decided to invade Canada, which was then a British colony. Tensions between the two countries had been rising, and many American leaders believed that absorbing Canadian territory was the next logical step. They envisioned a larger and more powerful nation. However, the invasion proved to be a disastrous failure. Despite a few early successes, the American forces were unable to hold their ground, and the war ended in a stalemate. Canada remained separate, and the idea of an American takeover quickly faded into the background. Fast forward to 1867, when Canada took a monumental step towards independence. That year, the British North America Act allowed Canada to become a self-governing dominion, though it was still under British influence. This move helped solidify Canada's identity as a nation, one that was separate from the U.S., but still closely connected to the British Empire. Even though both nations shared strong economic and cultural ties, Canada was determined to carve out its own future, free from American control. In the late 19th century, the United States' ambitions for expansion didn't subside. In 1898, the U.S. annexed Hawaii, fueling further debates about territorial growth. As the U.S. continued to grow, many Americans began to wonder, could Canada be the next prize? However, the idea of incorporating Canada into the Union never gained enough momentum, as both sides were more focused on their own growth and development. Instead of conflict, the two nations' borders remained peaceful, with both countries focusing on their own futures. By the 1940s and 50s, the Cold War had intensified, and the U.S. and Canada formed a close military alliance. They worked together to combat the growing Soviet threat, and many Canadian soldiers fought alongside American forces. Yet, despite their strengthened military partnership, Canada continued to assert its independence, refusing to join the United States. The ties that bound the two nations were built on mutual respect and cooperation, not on domination or annexation. Despite the deep economic, military, and cultural ties that bind the two countries, Canada has never become the 51st state. But with the political landscape constantly shifting, could the possibility of such an alliance ever arise? Or is this just another fleeting dream? As we look at the current economic and political landscape, one thing becomes clear: the relationship between the United States and Canada is far deeper than most people realize. On the surface, Canada might seem like an independent country, but the reality is that the economic and political ties with the U.S. are so strong, they almost blur the lines of sovereignty. Let's explore what's really going on. Imagine you're a Canadian business owner. You've got your products ready to ship, your suppliers lined up, and then you realize something: a massive portion of your business depends on the United States. In fact, a staggering 80% of Canadian exports go to the U.S. Whether it's lumber, oil, or technology, Canada's economy is intricately woven into the fabric of its southern neighbor. The U.S. is Canada's largest trading partner, and every deal, tariff, and policy change has a ripple effect across the Canadian economy. But it's not just about trade. Take a look at Canadian industries. American companies dominate sectors like media, retail, and energy. For instance, multinational giants like Walmart, McDonald's, and ExxonMobil have an outsized presence in Canada, often shaping local markets, job creation, and even cultural trends. It's a kind of silent influence, one that many Canadians don't fully appreciate until they realize how much of their daily lives are shaped by American corporations. And then there's the Canadian dollar. If you've ever wondered why the Canadian dollar seems to fluctuate so much, the answer lies in its connection to the U.S. economy. When the U.S. economy sneezes, the Canadian dollar catches a cold. Fluctuations in the value of the U.S. dollar directly impact Canada's currency, making the economy closely tied to the health of the U.S. financial system. Whether it's oil prices or trade wars, Canada often finds itself riding the coattails of U.S. decisions. But the integration doesn't stop at the economy. Politics, too, feels like a two-way street between the two countries. Consider the impact of U.S. presidential elections on Canada. When Donald Trump was in office, his tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum created a ripple effect, shaking up Canadian industries and triggering tense negotiations. Trade deals weren't just about dollars and cents, they were about how two countries with intertwined economies could ever hope to separate their destinies. Even beyond trade, Canadian politicians often find themselves aligning, or clashing, with U.S. leaders on global issues. Whether it's climate change, military involvement, or international diplomacy, Canada's political stance frequently mirrors, or counters, that of the United States. The pressures of global geopolitics, combined with a shared continent, make it hard for Canada to stray too far from U.S. policies. With such deep economic and political integration, doesn't it already feel like Canada is a part of the U.S.? Well, not so fast. There's more to this story than just trade deals and political posturing. As we've seen, the economic and political ties between Canada and the U.S. are undeniable. But when it comes to merging the two countries, the road gets a little rockier. There are geographical, cultural, and identity barriers that would make such a union far more complicated than it might first appear. Let's explore what's truly at stake. Take a moment to consider the vastness of Canada. The country is massive, stretching across over 9.9 million square kilometers. In fact, Canada is larger than the United States in landmass, but here's the twist, it is only 1/9 the population. It's a land of wide open spaces, vast forests, frozen tundras, and towering mountain ranges. Canada is a country of incredible natural beauty, but it's also one with a unique challenge, managing such vast, remote regions. Now, let's talk about culture. While the two countries share a common language and history, their identities are distinct, and these differences run deep. For instance, Canadians favor universal healthcare, a system where healthcare is considered a right for all citizens, and funded by taxes. On the other hand, the United States follows a largely privatized healthcare system, where access to medical services often depends on your ability to pay. Would Canadians ever trade their cherished healthcare system for one where access is determined by financial means? And what about the issue of gun laws? Canadians have some of the strictest firearm regulations in the world, with rigorous background checks and strict rules governing ownership. The U.S., on the other hand, has a deeply ingrained gun culture, where the Second Amendment guarantees the right to bear arms. Could a merger between these countries ever reconcile such fundamentally different approaches to personal freedoms? Culturally, Canadians see themselves as peacekeepers, a nation with a reputation for diplomacy, neutrality, and humanitarian aid. Canadians take pride in their role as global mediators. In contrast, the United States has a more interventionist foreign policy, often stepping in to shape world events through military action and political influence. Would Americans even want to absorb a country with such a distinct approach to foreign relations? Now, picture the United States taking on the responsibility of administering all of Canada's expansive territories, many of which are sparsely populated. The idea of having to govern a country with harsh winters, vast stretches of empty lands, and the high costs of maintaining infrastructure is a daunting thought. Would the U.S. want to take on such a logistical and financial burden? And would Canada even want to be absorbed into a nation that has to manage such a massive geographical challenge? But let's not forget Canada's abundant resources. Oil in Alberta, timber in British Columbia, and an impressive array of minerals. These resources are a huge economic asset, but they come with their own set of challenges. Extracting and managing these resources across such a large and diverse land means huge investments in infrastructure, roads, pipelines, cities, and technology. The cost of maintaining these resources might outweigh the potential economic gain, especially considering the empty land that would need to be developed. Would Canadians ever trade their healthcare and strict gun laws for U.S.-style policies? Would Americans even want to absorb a country so different from their own? The geography, culture, and identity barriers are far from trivial, and they raise serious questions about whether such a union is possible, or even desirable. As we approach the final part of this exploration, we've seen the complexities of such a union, the economic, political, and cultural barriers. But now it's time to ask, what are the challenges and opportunities if such a merger were to happen? First, let's look at the legal barriers. The very foundation of Canadian sovereignty is enshrined in its constitution, and any move to merge with the United States would require a drastic change. Canada's government would need to hold a national referendum, asking its citizens to vote on whether they'd be willing to give up their independence and join the U.S. Can you imagine the national debate that would unfold? A decision of this magnitude wouldn't just impact government policies, it would change the fabric of the nation itself. But even if that step were taken, there's another roadblock: public opposition. While many Canadians share deep economic and cultural ties with the U.S., polls consistently show that most Canadians prefer their sovereignty. They value their ability to make independent decisions, especially when it comes to healthcare, gun laws, and foreign policy. For Canadians, merging with the U.S. could feel like giving up more than just a border. It could feel like giving up their very identity. But let's not forget the opportunities. If Canada and the U.S. were to merge, the combined strength could be overwhelming. A unified North America would have the power to dominate global markets. The resources and industrial might of Canada, combined with the economic dynamism of the U.S., could create a superpower capable of shaping the world in ways both nations could only dream of separately. In terms of shared resources, energy and technology sectors could thrive under a unified system. With Canada's vast natural resources and the U.S.'s technological innovations, the two nations could leverage each other's strengths to lead in everything from renewable energy to cutting-edge tech. Imagine the potential of a continent-wide system for innovation and trade that could rival any other in the world. So, if it happens, there are big pros and huge cons. But what if it isn't? What if Canada continues to chart its own path, maintaining its sovereignty and its unique identity in the face of its larger neighbor? That, too, would be a future worth considering. As we move to the final chapter of this story, let's take a step back and look at the hard numbers. What does the data really say about this potential merger? First, consider this staggering statistic: 75% of Canadians oppose U.S. statehood. The majority of Canadians, it seems, are firmly against joining the United States, preferring to remain independent and keep their unique identity. This is a critical point in the conversation. Despite the deep economic ties, cultural affinity, and political cooperation, most Canadians don't want to lose their sovereignty. Then there's healthcare. 90% of Canadians support universal healthcare, which is in stark contrast to the U.S. system. Universal healthcare is something Canadians hold dear, and this major policy difference presents a fundamental barrier to a union. Would Canadians be willing to sacrifice a healthcare system that covers everyone in favor of a privatized system that many believe leaves too many behind? The answer, according to the numbers, is a resounding no. Now, imagine if these two countries were to join forces. The economic potential would be massive. The combined US-Canada economy would exceed $27 trillion, making it the largest economy in the world by a wide margin. That's an unimaginable scale of wealth and influence, where the combined resources could shift global markets. But with this economic power would come greater military spending, a 20% increase in military budgets, strengthening NATO influence and potentially altering the balance of power on the world stage. Numbers don't lie. While a merger seems powerful on paper, public resistance and cultural differences make it unlikely. The deep divides in healthcare, governance, and national identity stand in the way of a union that may have once seemed possible. The data tells us one thing: Canadians value their independence. As we reach the end of this exploration, one question remains: is Canada becoming the 51st state? Probably not. Despite all the economic and political ties, the sheer weight of public opposition and cultural divergence makes such a union highly unlikely. But the US and Canada are growing closer every day, and the question now isn't whether they will merge, but how long they can remain separate in a world that's becoming increasingly interconnected. Now, let's wrap this up with a question for you, our viewers. We've talked about Canada's strong sense of identity, but what if it wasn't Canada joining the US? What if parts of the US, such as specific states or regions, chose to join Canada instead? Could such a scenario bring new possibilities for unity, or would it be just as divisive? What do you think? Could any part of the US find a place within Canada? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Would you like to see Canada and the US join forces, or should they remain separate? And don't forget to check out our other video. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss out. If you ask my opinion, I believe both countries hold extreme economic and cultural value. Together, they could reshape the world, but separately, they can thrive in their own unique ways. Canada is a land of vast beauty and strong values, the US, a powerhouse of innovation and opportunity. These two nations have forged strong bonds, but I believe it's better for them to remain separate. Both countries have something incredibly special to offer the world, something that could be lost if they were to unite. What do you think?